Hello everybody, welcome to the Age Group Triathlon Podcast. My name is Simon Olney, I'm a professional triathlon coach, and in this week's episode I'm going to be looking at a subject that, well, all of us have asked at some point, which is how are some athletes so much faster than I am? It's often a question I think we all ask ourselves this throughout our career, but especially when we're starting out. We can train for an event for maybe a year, maybe it's taking us even longer to get to that first start line. And then we get there and we're really proud of all the work that we put in. You know, we have learned to swim in open water, really put in the work on the bike and the run, and we're so pleased with our training. And then we get there on race day and people go past us like we are standing still. I go, what on earth am I doing wrong? Like, how is it that they could be so fast? You know, it boggles the mind that somebody could be pushing that hard for that long. Now, as a Ironman certified coach, British Triathlon high performing coach, level 4 personal trainer, certified nutrition coach, strength and conditioning coach, someone with 10 years of experience and over 50 triathlon finishes to their name, I feel that I'm in a pretty good position to be able to answer this question. So we're going to break it down. We're going to look at all of the aspects of athletic, from a very high level. Look at the aspects of athletic performance and why it is that these people are faster than you and what it is that you can do to close that gap. First thing I wanted to touch on, however, are some things that you're simply not in control of. So age. It's no secret that human performance, it peaks around about our mid-20s, and I'm afraid it's downhill from there. But that doesn't mean that you can't improve beyond that. So if you only start the sport in your mid-30s, you can keep improving exponentially into your 50s, okay? But when we are looking at the absolute limit of human performance, then they are going to have an edge. There is also your gender to take into consideration. Unfortunately, there are no triathlon distances or disciplines where women are faster than men. It's to do with that peak muscle mass that we can achieve. It's due to a sort of a lower ceiling of VO2 max at the very limit of human potential. Now, this gap isn't massive. You don't need to make huge changes to your training just because you're a woman. However, if we are looking at the absolute peak of human potential, then we do need to compare apples to apples. And that can be very difficult, but you know, as a female athlete, you need to be comparing yourself and your progression to other female athletes. Genetics is another big one. Now, this comes down to, a number of factors, such as somebody's height, somebody's leg length, sort of arm span, it just sort of their innate aerobic fitness, even sort of somebody's sort of natural body composition. Some people are just naturally slimmer, while some people are just naturally broader. And there's very little that we can do to change that. You know, I've got some friends, obviously myself, I've always been sort of quite skinny. I've got some friends who, if they were to lose any more weight, it just wouldn't look good on them. It just wouldn't suit them. So you can't compare yourself to people and go, I just need to get under 60 kilograms. That is the key to performance. Some people have body types which are better suited to triathlon, but there are very few people out there who have a body type that would prevent them from achieving any goal, such as sort of getting to the Ironman World Championships. You know, there are different factors to take into consideration. There is that genetic factor, but realistically, the genetics are only limiting our absolute peak potential. There's so much more that we can cover in this episode that will go above that, but not everybody has the genetics it takes to go pro or to win the Olympics. And finally, we have doping. Now, unfortunately, this is something that is, I wouldn't say rampant in the age group triathlon scene, but it's definitely present. I think that there was a survey that came like a frightening number, like 30% of male athletes over a certain age admitted to taking some performance-enhancing drugs. Now, in most cases, this is simply testosterone. I think that accounts for the majority of it. I think the number of age groupers who are doing EPO and the like is quite small, but you do have to just remind yourself that, there are people out there who are cheating. They have justified it to themselves. I'm just levelling the playing field. It's just a bit of tea. It doesn't really matter. It does matter. And if you have managed to justify to yourself that taking performance enhancing drugs is fine, okay, then please just unsubscribe from this podcast. So those are the factors that are out of your control. So there's an awful lot that is in your control. In fact, the vast majority of things are in your control. But I still want to touch on the fact that, when it comes to the absolute peak of human performance, which most of us won't come anywhere close to achieving, including myself, there are certain areas which are out of your control and you just need to accept that. Something which is kind of out of your control is the time that you spent in the sport, because you could be in year 1 or year 2 of your triathlon journey, and the issue could be, you just haven't been in sport long enough, which is the case for the majority of people. But there's nothing that you can do about that in the immediate. You cannot buy an upgrade for your bike that will compensate for that. What you can do is you can keep turning up and you can keep chipping away, okay? And this is absolutely essential. And if nothing else, I want you to take away from this podcast that the biggest determinant of triathlon performance is the time that you have spent in the sport. There is no replacement for stacking decades of consistent training. And in the age group scene, a lot of the people who will absolutely blitz past you, they could well be in their 40s, maybe even their early 50s. And you could be in your 20s and getting put to the sword by these people who have just been turning up for years on end, okay? So, it's not in your control, you cannot artificially add years to the sport, but what you can do is you can keep turning up month after month, year after year, decade after decade, and that is how you really achieve those kinds of speed. That is the level of work and commitment that is required to go past people like they're standing still. Now, it may be you don't want to make that commitment, and that's fine, but I just want to explain to you, because that is the case, because what the difference is between you and this other athlete, I'll tell you this, and you really need to hear this, it is not the equipment. Now, don't get me wrong, if somebody has a fully tricked out triathlon bike, and you're there on a hybrid bike, or just, sort of a bit of a clanky old road bike, okay? Yes, they do have a definite advantage. But that alone does not compensate for the fact that they are going past you at twice the speed, okay? If you swap bikes, they would still go past you at almost twice the speed. The same goes for wetsuits, for carbon-plated running shoes, for aerodynamic tri-suits, okay? There are lots of companies out there who feel the frustration of amateur athletes to always want to go faster. And the marketing really leans into this, okay? They promise to be able to solve your performance problems by all you need to do is you just need to spend £500 on this super tri-suit, and that's going to solve your problems, okay? It's bollocks. Yes, it will make you marginally faster if you have everything else sorted out in your training. But the fact of the matter is, people like buying stuff. I like buying stuff, I love a new bike, and getting new kit. It really is, there's something really nice about that, but it is not going to make you that much faster. Feels nice, it feels good. It may help you set, a small personal best if you get yourself some really nice racing wheels, but it's all for nothing if the training isn't there, okay? And the focus of this is going to be on the training. Starting off with the training, what is the primary influencer on our ability as a triathlete? Well, it is what's known as aerobic fitness. And I'm going to start at the bottom here for people who may be new to the sport or not understand this. So, your aerobic system is how we convert oxygen into energy. And we use this every second of every day. So what happens is we inhale oxygen from the air, that oxygen moves down into our lungs, makes its way through our lungs, where our red blood cells will collect the oxygen from the alveoli in our lungs, Take the oxygen to the heart, which will then pump the oxygen around the body. When the red blood cells with the oxygen reach the muscles, then the energy gets transferred into the muscles where it gets converted into something known as ATP, adenosine triphosphate, which is what energy is made from, really. And so that allows us to contract our muscles, and just about every movement in the body is occurred. Even as I'm talking to you here, this is all created with oxygen. Okay, the contraction of the muscles, which is helped by oxygen, and that is how the human body works. And as triathletes, our ability when we are swimming, cycling and running is primarily dictated by the rate at which we can convert oxygen into energy. So now we understand the bare bone basics, let's understand what it is that can help us. So if we are becoming more aerobically fit, the more exercise that we do, we will develop more alveoli in our lungs, okay, which will help with better transfer of oxygen to the bloodstream. This is something that a lot of us had when we were younger, but as we became more sedentary, as instead of sort of spending our time running around as kids, we then had to sit around in school, and we decided that we wanted to play computer games instead of going down the park with our friends or spend all time scrolling the internet. Then we tend to lose this aerobic capacity, but we sort of regenerate some of that alveoli, which means that simply our lungs can sort of transfer more oxygen into more red blood cells. Okay, so more oxygen is getting to our bloodstream faster, which is really important. And we get bigger, stronger lungs as well as a result. So with each breath that we take in, we're getting more oxygen. If you sort of listen to sort of a smoker who gets slightly out of breath, they've got really small, clogged up lungs due to their habit. So as athletes, we have these big, massive lungs, as really aerobically fit athletes, huge lungs to get more oxygen into the bloodstream much faster. And then that oxygen gets pumped around our body by the heart. Now, when we're racing and training as athletes, most of us are going to record our heart rates. Now, if you are going to train with heart rate, I highly recommend you use a chest strap rather than the heart rate monitor on your watch. Now, the heart rate monitor on your watch, it's fine, okay? But I really would recommend that if you want to accurately track your heart rate when you're training, especially if you're training 2 heart rates. Now, when I'm running, I don't tend to wear a chest strap because I really struggle to stop the chest strap from slipping down and ending up around my waist. I think just the way that I am built, the shape of my chest, it's not conducive to chest straps. So when I'm running, I just use the heart rate monitor on my watch. But when I'm cycling, I will be using the heart rate monitor on chest strap rather than just relying on my watch, because the data is so much more accurate. But the higher the heart rate, the harder we are working. If you are riding along at 160, 165 beats per minute, you're going to be going very fast. You're going to be working very hard. If you are going at a heart rate of 100, 110 beats per minute, things are going to be really quite easy. Now, I remember I was doing a Zwift ride with Anne Haug, who an exceptional triathlete who recently retired. And I think she was the reigning Ironman world champion at the time. And we were in this group ride, and, there was this chat that was going on, and somebody asked her what her heart rate was. And she said she was at like 105 beats per minute or something like that. Now, we were all going along. I think I was at like high 130s, low 140s. So it's a sustainable effort. But the fact is, she was 30 beats per minute lower than me for that effort. Who do you think is going to be able to sustain that effort for longer? Who do you think could go much faster if they wanted to? Okay, the heart rate that we are at for an effort is indicative of our aerobic fitness. And the biggest influencer of our aerobic fitness and the ability of ourselves to get oxygen to our muscles is our heart. And this is why heart rate is so intrinsically linked to our performance. Because if we have a big, strong heart, every contraction of that heart sends much more oxygen flying around the body. If we have a weak heart, small heart, then we aren't transporting nearly as much oxygen for each beat. The result of this is a slower triathlon performance, because our heart is having to work so much harder for a given effort to sustain that same speed, that same level of effort. Okay, we want to be flying along really fast with a low beats per minute. Now, whenever we are racing, if we look at a sprint triathlon, everybody's heart rate is going to be in sort of the 160s to 170s. If we are looking at an Ironman, everybody's heart rate is going to be sort of the 150s at most. Again, you know, some people, they have a naturally higher or lower heart rate. I'm not suggesting doing something wrong if your heart rate's outside of this. But the difference is that the professionals who are riding along at that heart rate are pushing out, say, like 320 watts, when I'm there going along at 180 watts. Okay? That there is the difference. It's the aerobic fitness. It's the ability of our body to turn oxygen into energy. So, pray tell, Simon, how do I increase this all-important aerobic fitness? I can hear you asking. Well, there are two main things that are going to influence your aerobic fitness, okay? The first one is your time in the sport. So that is what I went back to before. Years of training stacked one on top of the other is what is going to improve this aerobic fitness. You need to think of aerobic fitness like house prices, you know. It may go down at some points, but as long as you keep turning up predictably, it is going to keep increasing year after year after year, okay? You just need to keep turning up. Keep training, you know, 5 or 6 times a week, maybe more if you want. You know, taking some time off in the off season, but just keep showing up long term. That is what is going to help. Weekly hours as well. There is no getting around the fact that somebody who trains for 20 hours a week is probably going to be faster than somebody who trains for 5 hours a week. Now, I don't want somebody to push themselves to the brink of exhaustion or start to let the other parts of their life fall apart because they're too focused on maximising the hours of training in their week. Some people, they'll do absolutely fine on 15 hours a week. I completed an Ironman on 8 hours of training a week, okay? It wasn't a fast time, but I did it. However, you do need to be pragmatic and go, look, there is no way for me to go toe to toe, head to head with people who are just have that much more time in the sport. And there is a really ugly relationship here, but I do want to bring it to the fore. If you have somebody who is lucky enough, due to whatever factors, that they don't need to worry about money, they have a lot less responsibility, especially if they're not a parent, if they don't have many responsibilities within their sort of family. They can dedicate loads more time to their training than somebody who works a full-time job, has a young family, is married. They have all of these factors that they are having to fit into their week, okay? Some people, they can just fit more training into their week, and that is going to result in improved aerobic fitness, okay? Which is going to allow them to race faster. Is there an element of privilege there? Yeah, I'm afraid there is. Is it fair? Not really, but unless you want to live in a communist society, which I assure you probably isn't a good idea in the long run, then that's always going to be a factor. Now, to measure our aerobic fitness, there are 3 metrics that we tend to look at. We've got our VO2 max, our power at LT1, and our power at LT2, which you can refer to simply as LT1 and LT2 just to help keep things simple. But let's start by looking at VO2 max. Well, it's a measure of how much oxygen your body can process without having to become primarily anaerobic. And as an intensity, this is an intensity you can only really hold for around about like a maximum of about 5 minutes. It's when you the kind of pace that you hold in that final kilometre of a race where you really are going all in. You're going above your race pace for the rest of the race. You are accumulating fatigue, it's unsustainable. This is your VO2 max. And you can measure your VO2 max. Your watch can give you a very poor estimate. I recommend that you don't pay much attention to that. But you can go and get this measured at a lab, where you can complete a test to exhaustion whilst wearing a mask which measures gas exchange, and it can tell you how much oxygen your body is processing. How useful is this? Not super useful. If I'm honest, it's a bit of a vanity metric. And it can give you some training zones, but realistically, it's not that useful a measurement. I don't generally recommend anyone except, those athletes that I'm working with that are really at the top of their game, sort of investigate looking into VO2 max testing. But it is often used as a measure of fitness. And yeah, it calculates how much oxygen your body can process. And broadly speaking, the higher your VO2 max, the faster you will go. LT1 stands for lactate threshold 1. Now, lactic acid, it gets quite complicated, and I don't really want to go into the weeds too much here. But lactic acid is what we produce when we are working at a very high intensity, and it is what makes your legs feel like they're filling up with lead as you ride along. Now, it's not terrible, because lactate itself can be used as a fuel source, but I don't want to go into that too much here right now because it will confuse things. But when we are riding along at lactate threshold 1, we are starting to accumulate this lactate. So we are working, this is kind of like, think this has been like marathon or 70.3 pace. This is the point at which we start to accumulate lactate. This is the kind of pace that, we are feeling this. Okay, this kind of 3 to 4 hour effort. For a well-trained individual, I should point out. It's definitely not easy. It's definitely not sustainable. It's just, we're just starting to think, there's only so long I can hold this for. Whereas if we are working below LT1, say when we're taking on an Ironman, we should be going along thinking, I could keep this going all day, which is a good job because you're going to have to. But that is the rough definition of LT1 there. And then LT2 is where we are working at that kind of FTP, 10k race pace, critical swim speed. We are able to hold that for somewhere between kind of 30 and 60 minutes, depending on how fit you are. You are really starting to accumulate lactate at a very high level when you're at LT2. I should take the opportunity to apologise for any background noise at this point. My dog, who normally sits there at the foot of the bed and is very quiet when I'm podcasting, we've got some nice sun coming through the window this morning, so she's sat on the bed, panting and really enjoying the sun. So I do apologise if any of this makes its way onto the soundtrack. Now, if you wanted to, you could go to a lab and you can get a lactate threshold test where they will sit you on a bike, or you could be on a treadmill, and you'll be going along, and they will increase the intensity as you are completing this test, and they will take a little prick, a finger prick normally, and then measure the amount of lactate in your blood. And they will then upload all this information, and they'll be able to give you accurate heart rate zones that will be able to tell you at what point you are accumulating different levels of lactate within your bloodstream and help you find your LT1 and your LT2. How useful is this? Not incredibly useful in my experience. Now, this isn't to say it's rubbish, but for you to really be able to understand and get the most out of this data, you need to retest like every 3 to 4 months. And it's not a crazy expensive test, but still, it is money that you're going to be spending. So, I would recommend that you especially if you're just starting out, if you just want to improve, if you haven't got any hefty performance goals, you focus less on sort of the numbers of getting the tests and just going, well, what can I do to increase my LT1 and my LT2? If you are taking on a Ironman or a 70.3, LT1 is going to be the single most important one for you to focus on. LT2, not nearly so much. So improving your LT1, it is largely about long, easy sessions, VO2 max sessions, but the The fact of the matter is that all training is going to increase your LT1. The sessions that focus more on FTP, those that are sort of focus, or threshold, I should say, really, the LT2. Those who the sessions that are really prolonged intensity, okay, they're going to focus more on your LT2. But you need to include those in your training anyway. Everything is going to affect both of these markers of aerobic performance. So it is a case of just keep turning up, just keep training, and we're going to get onto exercise intensity distribution in a bit. If you are training for a sprint, or definitely a sprint, maybe an Olympic, you could be equally as interested in LT2 as you are in LT1, because you want to be able to hold that higher power or pace for a prolonged period. If you have an FTP of 180 watts, you're probably going to get beat on the bike by somebody with an FTP of 250 watts. And you improve that FTP by developing sort of that LT2. You're delaying the onset of that lactic acid by becoming more aerobically fit. Okay, because lactate comes in and starts providing the body with energy. And it's anaerobic. It's a marker of anaerobic fitness when your body starts creating energy with lactate that it cannot sustain. To break aerobic and anaerobic fitness down very simply, for those who aren't aware, aerobic is in the presence of oxygen, where anaerobic is without the presence of oxygen. When if you were to do a 100-meter sprint, that would be 90% of energy coming from your anaerobic system. That is your fight or flight, I'm running away from a saber-toothed tiger energy system. It allows the body to switch on really quickly those muscles and to be able to absolutely haul ass, but you cannot sustain that for long, because the body will start flooding with this lactic acid, and you are going to finish with a huge oxygen debt, which is why you'll find yourself on your knees gasping for air. But this is a big sliding scale between the 100-meter and that kind of marathon pace, where you are there's going to be a presence of lactate in both of those. There's going to be a contribution from the anaerobic system in both of those. It's just that there is a much greater, a far greater contribution from the anaerobic system in 100-meter dash, as opposed to a marathon, where there may just be sort of like a slight trickle of lactate that's starting to slowly accumulate. Now, when we're improving aerobic fitness, we are going to be improving LT1 and LT2 at the same time. And that is inevitable, and that is important. We want, regardless of the distance that we are training at, we want both of these to be strong. But if you are training for a sprint distance, then sessions which target improvement at LT2 are going to be really important, as well as those that target LT1. So it's all about getting that balance right. It's all about improving the overall aerobic fitness. So how do we improve this? Which training sessions should we be doing? Well, that's going to change throughout the year, depending on the target event that you have, how far away from the event you are, and a number of other factors. But we do a lot of training in that zone where we are sort of what we call sort of zone 2 of a 5-zone system, where we are ticking along and we are not developing any lactic acid. Okay, we are below LT1 for these sessions, and we're just ticking along and we're putting in the miles without developing a huge amount of fatigue in the process. Then, when we switch to sessions which are sort of zone 5 of that 5-zone system, so around like VO2 max, we are really improving our sort of aerobic ceiling, because your VO2 max really is the limiter of how aerobically fit you can be. It's measured as the maximum amount of oxygen your body can process per minute, and we need to improve this with VO2 max sessions, but also just that general long distance training. If people are focused only on LT2, if people are only putting in threshold, sweet spot, tempo work, the kind of sessions that people who are new to the sport would tend to gravitate towards, then you're not going to be improving that VO2 max as much as you could be. Now, you can reach a limit of the VO2 max. I really am getting to the weeds here more than I expected to. But you can improve your VO2 max, but everyone will have a limit at which they cannot perform beyond that. But that being said, some people have quite low VO2 max numbers without actually being exceptional endurance athletes. If you look at Mark Cavendish, again, I don't know the numbers, but the rumour is that his VO2 max, despite the fact that he's won more stages of the Tour de France than any other cyclist in history, is relatively low compared to other professional cyclists. So I want to push people away from the idea of simply chasing a VO2 max number and thinking, oh, there is a super close relationship between aerobic fitness and speed on race day, because there is so much more to it than that. You may have heard people talk about polarized training, and this is where we train predominantly in zone 2 and zone 5 without really any zone 3 or zone 4 in there at all. And this is very effective for those who are taking on Ironman events, especially somebody who is newer to Ironman events. Now, it's not especially exciting, I guess, because you spend so much time at that low intensity, but it really, really works. For most people at least, there are some people who really don't respond well to it, but the majority of people, because aerobic fitness is going to be their limiter, it will improve their performance if they just slowly keep putting, with the exception of rest weeks, if every week you're just training a bit more than the previous one, and you're doing most of that intensity at most of that training at a low intensity, so it is sustainable in the long term, that is how we go about achieving excellent performance at Ironman events. Now, especially as someone becomes a more competitive, yes, and they get closer to the race, we will be doing a bit more in the way of like tempo and threshold work. We don't ignore it, well, at least I don't ignore it entirely. You also have pyramidal training, where you have, it looks like a pyramid stacked from zone 1, zone 2, zone 3, zone 4, zone 5. So you do loads of zone 2, a bit less zone 3, a bit less zone 4, and a bit less zone 5. I know that some athletes work really well with this, and when I onboard athletes, I'll have another conversation if they've worked, with other coaches, or they've been in sport a long time, and say to them, okay, well, like, what do you respond well to? Because there's no point in me saying, oh, we're going to go for this approach if they have been getting excellent results with a pyramidal approach. So it really does depend on somebody's physiology, their limiters, all of these factors, their training history, on the way that you distribute that intensity. But the number one way to improve your triathlon performance is improved aerobic fitness. Something else which I feel can be overlooked by a lot of coaches personally is muscular endurance. So we've looked at our aerobic fitness. Okay, we have ascertained that the uptake of oxygen, turning it into energy, is paramount, but we still need to push the pedals around on our bike. We still need to push off the ground repeatedly when running. Okay, we still need to spin our arms around in the water and to be able to really push big handfuls of water behind us without tiring. And to improve this muscular endurance, we do need to spend time at that slightly higher intensity, at that sort of zone 3 intensity, zone 4. A lot of coaches hate this. But for me, I think that we do need to include it. Because otherwise you have a really aerobically fit individual whose muscles just give out on them. They go, my lungs felt absolutely fine, I just couldn't keep pushing the pedals around. And there's no point in having this absolute beast of aerobic engine if you don't have the muscles to back it up. So by doing these, especially if somebody is taking on a middle distance event, a 70.3, we will do long tempo sessions. Okay, we will include threshold sessions. Just about any distance that somebody does, but especially when we get close to race day for a sprint triathlon, we are going to be doing lots of that threshold work because that's the kind of intensity we're going to be holding on race day. In the preparation phase, when we're in the middle of winter, we won't be doing nearly as much of this, but as we start to get into the base period, when we start working towards our big races, we do need to include it, so we do need to develop that muscular endurance. Now, when you're out doing a 5-hour ride in zone 2, you will be developing muscular endurance. But we do need to have some sessions which are going to target that higher intensity, especially if we plan to race, as a lot of people will, in a 70.3 at a slightly higher intensity. We also have muscular force. Now, muscular endurance is the ability to hold, a low to moderate effort for a prolonged period, but if we were to bring somebody in like this guy who was somebody who's a power lifter who completes some powerlifting, so that is bench press, that is squat, and that is deadlift, and they compete over those three lifts. If we were to get them and we were to put them on a bike and to do a 1 minute power test, you against that power lifter, chances are they beat you. Because they just have that sheer muscular force to push the pedals around that bit harder. Now, what their limiter is that they probably have minimal to no cardiovascular training in their week. They may do 1 day of cycling or jogging, but for the most part, they're in their gym and they are focusing on what's going to help them in their competition, in their sport. So for them, the aerobic fitness is the limiter, but the strength of their muscles is going to carry them. And if that powerlifter were to go, you know what, I don't want to do powerlifting anymore, I am going to become a triathlete, they're probably going to kick your butt. Because when you have that balance of that aerobic fitness and that muscular force, the ability, especially on the bike, in the swim where it's so technical, less so. On the run, it doesn't transfer quite as well. But I've ridden with plenty of people who've just started cycling but come from that gym background, and they are really strong cyclists because they can just push the pedals round and round and round, and their legs don't give up on them. Now they need that. What they lack is the aerobic fitness. But if after about a year of aerobic fitness and training, they can put lots of people to the sword. They really can. Now on the steep hills where they might have sort of more muscle mass. Yes, thank you, Poppy. Where they might have more muscle mass than most people. Okay, that could end up sort of hurting them on the longer climbs. But on the shorter climbs, they'll absolutely wipe the floor with me. So we need to include strength training in our training regime to improve our muscular force, and we need to include training that is at that zone 3, zone 4 level to improve our muscular force. Okay, we need all three aspects of that: the muscular force, the muscular endurance, and the aerobic fitness. That is the trifecta of triathlon performance. And those people who do absolutely blitz you on race day, chances are they include strength training. I would put good money on the fact that any athlete working at a very high level is including strength training. Because it is just a super easy way for you to improve your performance, okay? It only has to take 2 45-minute sessions a week could be all it takes. It's so important for somebody who has performance goals or who wants to take on a big challenge to include strength training. Now, some people associate strength training with a lot of soreness. Well, honestly, that's just telling me that you went too hard in the gym. Or, yeah, I mean, obviously, if somebody's very new to strength training, then there will be some soreness, during the first kind of month or two when their body's slowly getting used to it. But, I mean, I got to the point. I mean, it was a few years ago now, but where I really hit the gym hard one winter, and I got to the point where I could squat nearly twice my body weight, and then go for a run the next day, because my body just got used to it, just got acclimatized. But people give up on strength training because they have that soreness and they go, "Oh no, it's rubbish, I'm not going to do it," because they went too hard in their first session. That competitive athletic mindset really got to their head, and they thought, "Oh, I've got to go hard in the gym if I want to see results." And they couldn't run for a week afterwards. It's no wonder that some people, just slag it off as not being any good, because they're trying to persuade themselves that it's not any good. But I would honestly, most people would say, look, just drop a session or two a week to include some strength training. Now, I'm recording this in April, okay? If you have a race in June, this probably isn't the time to start including strength training. At the end of last year, I recorded a 3-part series on strength training. Go back, have a listen to that. If your race is until August, September, you can start to include some of this, okay? I really recommend that you do so. Because strength training isn't just about developing muscular force, as useful as that is. It's also about improving our mobility. So it is about doing challenging exercises. which are going to place us out of our comfort zone in positions we're not used to being in, to help ensure that we are developing good mobility in our joints. Now, mobility and flexibility are often mixed up, and I can totally understand why. Because it is, it's quite difficult for people to get their head around. Now, mobility is, as an example, if you were to take your arm and you were to lift it above your head, that is a test of mobility in that joint. So if you can get your hand and your arm way above your head, you have good mobility. If you struggle to achieve that, then there's a chance that, you do have relatively sort of poor mobility in your shoulder joint. Now, as we age, our mobility does decrease. I mean, you can just see, if you see people, I'd say once people sort of hit 80 or 90, where, they just don't sort of pick their feet up off the floor in the same way. They struggle to reach for things, and part of this is absolutely to do with some deconditioning, but it's also due to a condition known as sarcopenia, which is just an inevitable loss of muscle mass as we get older. Now, mobility is of critical importance for triathletes because it allows us to be able to sort of move in the most efficient pattern possible. Having all of the VO2 max aerobic fitness in the world isn't going to help you if your mobility in your shoulder joint is so poor that you can't swim properly. If you have very poor mobility in your hips, which will affect the way that you cycle. If you have poor mobility in your ankles, which is going to really affect how you run. This is all going to have a very significant effect on your speed. And we improve mobility by doing two things. Firstly, is by placing the body in uncomfortable positions in the weight room. Okay, by doing exercises such as a overhead squat, where we'll drop down, we're holding a sort of a light bar above our head. We drop down, we squat down, keeping our heels on the floor and keeping the bar in line with the back of our head. And a lot of people being put in an incredibly uncomfortable position by doing this. But by doing this, we are improving the mobility. We are training our body to be able to hold positions that are normally uncomfortable for us. But the reason that a lot of us have poor mobility in the first place is very tight muscles. And if triathletes do no stretching, if they have weak, tight muscles from doing lots of swimming, cycling and running, but not doing any stretching, okay, or foam rolling, not giving their body the time that it takes to recover, and not strengthening those muscles in the gym, that is going to result in poor mobility, as will hours of sitting a day. It really impedes the mobility in our hips. So between mobility exercises and improving our flexibility through practices such as yoga, okay, or sort of static standalone stretching, that is going to allow our body to move in much greater patterns. And when you look at the very fastest athletes, when you slow down those really key sort of top of the sport athletes as they're running, as they're cycling, as they're swimming, and you see how planted they are on the bike and how their hips, their lower legs, they're moving like pistons, okay, and they're really getting all of it out, everything out of every stroke. When you look at the sort of the stride length, the hip extension that elite runners get, if you catch sort of a still frame of the top of the sport marathon run and see how long their stride length is, that can only be achieved with fantastic hip mobility, or the shoulder mobility of an elite swimmer that allows them to have a beautiful stroke and enough ankle mobility to have their toes pointed behind them so they are in a nice streamlined position. Mobility is a massive, massive hurdle for most triathletes, and it's actually preventing them from being able to go faster because, they hear people talk about the importance of zone 2, which is really important, but they fail to include strength training. They fail to stretch, they fail to improve their mobility, and that hampers their ability to turn the aerobic fitness into speed. Because technique, or speed skills as some people refer to them, are critical. It's easy for those of us who are already established, especially swimmers, cyclists and runners, to sort of to dismiss the importance of this and say, oh, it's all about aerobic fitness. But especially for someone just starting out, the ability of them to be able to swim and to be able to generate propulsion in the water, to be able to breathe while swimming, it is enormous. There's a reason that so many people look up to triathletes, and it's the open water swimming. Is the ability to swim freestyle in the water and to be able to breathe and do that for, well, up to sort of 2.4 miles in an Ironman. The technique to be able to do that is what a lot of people admire. Because you can get a lot of people, I think we've all, those of us who have been to pools attached to gyms, you get these people who go up in the gym and they do their workout and they hop in the pool and they swim for 2 lengths and hop in the sauna. They may really sprint for those 2 lengths because it feels good, but they know their technique is rubbish. They're under no illusions. And having the ability to be able to swim consistently, not just the fitness, but the technical ability to be able to swim for that long, that consistently, it's an enormous part of our success as triathletes, as our speed. And you can have people who are a fraction of as fit as you are on the bike, who can absolutely put you to the sword in the swim because of their improved technique. Now, improved technique is only worth so much. You know, it is about the fitness. It is about the muscular endurance in the swim to be able to hold that good technique for that long. You know, swimming 50 metres with a perfect technique is one thing. Be able to swim 2.4 miles in open water, surrounded by lots of other thrashing bodies, is something else entirely. But also true on the bike, our ability to handle the bike. You know, I mean, our sort of skills when it comes to braking and cornering as well. These are all really important. You can have people who can be absolute weapons on a turbo trainer and be incredibly aerobically fit. But you put them onto a road with a set of aero bars. So, right, you know, go and ride this course really fast and they won't be able to. They'll be overtaken by people left, right and centre because they have huge amounts of aerobic fitness, which is, you know, really important for racing. But if they can't go around corners, if they brake way too early, if they are coming out of the aero bars at the mere sight of a pothole, okay, they're not going to be able to turn that aerobic fitness into results. And the same on the run. Now, with the run, there are some keys that I like to give people. Stand up straight, look forward, use your arms. You know, keep your arms at 90 degrees. You know, some cues about cadence and the like, but broadly speaking, with running, your body will find the best way for it to run. You look at the form of some of the top professional athletes, it's rubbish. Yeah, I mean, you know, I'm sorry, Lionel Sanders. I mean, I know you're not listening, but, you know, you are not a beautiful runner, but you know what you are? You are a very fast runner, okay? And that is what matters. So it's less about having the absolute, the most perfect stride, the most aesthetic stride in the world. But that's great if you can look really nice. But what's more important is being fast. So I don't like to tell people to reinvent their run stride. Or, you know, you've got to have a longer stride. You've got to have a 4-foot stride. You've got to have a mid-foot stride. You know, you've got to use these shoes because this increases the risk of injury. But by including mobility and flexibility within our training, this will allow our body to move in the way it should do, that it wants to be able to achieve performance. Something which is overlooked by a lot of triathletes, mainly the slower ones, is recovery. So it's the ability of us to recover from one session to be ready for the next, or to recover from a big block of training ahead of the next one. Now, when I am writing somebody's training, I will include a recovery week in there, roughly every 4 weeks. Now, when I first started out, I'd write people these really detailed annual training plans, and this is the way that things are going to go. These days, I've got a little bit more pragmatic about it because life doesn't generally work like that. It's very rare that somebody can take a recovery week when they want to because there are trips for work. If somebody has to go away on a work trip, then that's going to be their recovery week. If somebody is unwell, that's going to be their recovery week. If it's half term and they need to take their kids out and look after them all the time, that's going to be their recovery week. Now, when I write training plans, of course, I still include the sort of the general training plans for sale. I include a recovery week every 4 weeks because, I don't know that athlete, I don't know their commitments. But when it is someone that I'm working with on a one-to-one basis, there has to be some fluidity as to when we include our recovery weeks. And the importance of these is that we can recover from that block of training and be ready to go again. And this is a mistake that so many people make, because anyone can train for a week, for a month, hard, okay? It's not difficult. It doesn't take huge amounts of commitment. What does take a huge amount of commitment is turning up for, 6 months, 8 months, non-stop training. And that is what makes a fast athlete. But you need to include recovery. Not only these recovery weeks, not only recovery at the end of the session, but you also need to be thinking about recovery after each session. Okay, how is it that I'm going to be ready for the next session, whether it's later that day, whether it's tomorrow, whether it's in 2 days' time? What can I do? And that comes down to sort of stretching, having a good stretch at the end of the session or on a rest day to make sure that your muscles are nice and loose for the session. It's about taking your load off. Okay, it's about relaxing, maybe just sort of doing a gentle yoga, maybe not one that's going to be like really about stretching, but time to switch your mind off. It could be just sitting on the sofa with a book, switching off for an hour or two. Okay, there are lots of things that we can do where we're just taking time to allow our body to reset and recharge. You can also get things such as recovery boots, which you put your legs into. They make them feel nice and cool. I don't know if they work. I don't think they do, if I'm honest. Saunas, there are various studies around which point towards different devices and think which can help with recovery. I'm a little bit dubious about a lot of them. I mean, I enjoy a sauna. I guess there's a little bit of just sort of a bias there because, I enjoy a sauna. So, I would be inclined to think, oh, yes, I'm sure they do help. But the fact is, I wouldn't recommend that people invest too much in the way of recovery tools that promise to help or that elite athletes claim to use. I mean, a foam roller, that's probably fine, but for the most part, I recommend against spending what can be really quite a lot of money on expensive sort of recovery tools that promise to help your muscles recover faster. What is worth spending money on, though, is nutrition. And this is nutrition for recovery that I'm talking about. So after you finish a session, you're going to want to have some carbohydrate to replace the carbohydrate that you have burned during the session so that you have energy for the rest of the day. But you're also going to want some protein. Now, this doesn't have to be immediately after your session, okay? There were studies that came out in sort of the mid-noughties, I think it was, mid to late noughties, that believed that there was this protein adaptation window and that you needed to have some protein within 20 to 30 minutes of finishing your workout to be able to kickstart that recovery process. Apparently, I haven't sort of read the papers myself, but apparently there haven't really been studies that have been able to replicate these findings since. Not to say they're not true, but I think that a lot of nutrition companies have latched onto this because they want to sell their protein bars, their protein shakes, talk about this recovery window that you got to get your protein in quickly, and you need our products in your gym bag or after you finish a session. And there is nothing wrong with having a protein supplement or a high protein snack or meal, breakfast, whatever it is that you choose shortly after a workout. But I don't want people to think they have to use shakes or bars to get it really quickly, because the evidence suggests that may or may not be the case. But again, try these things to see what works for you. But focusing on carbohydrate, focusing on protein after a session is really critical, and with your meals throughout the day. Eating healthy is incredibly important for performance. If you have somebody who is just, they're getting fast food or just pre-packaged foods, throughout most of the day, because it's quick, because it's convenient, okay? this really isn't the way to go. I know it's a lot easier to say this than to do this, but if you can spend some time on the weekend doing a meal prep, okay, make some really good quality, nutritious food for you to eat throughout the week, that's going to make an enormous difference to your recovery, to your energy levels. It's just, what's not to like? Your immune system will be boosted, your energy levels. Recovering and fueling your workouts with the right nutrition is absolutely critical. I cannot push this home enough. Now, with several years in the sport comes a lot of trial and error. And of course, the aerobic fitness, incredibly important. But what's also important is that the athletes who will blitz past you on the race course, they've made a lot of mistakes. In fact, they might be on their way to making a big mistake. They might be pushing too hard on the bike, which is why they've gone blasting past you. Chances are they might have overtaken you anyway, but the fact they're going at such a light speed there could be because they've got their pacing a bit wrong. They've gone too easy, they've gone too hard, they've crashed their bike, they've got the nutrition wrong. They've raced so many triathlons that they've got all of the mistakes out of the way. Now, nobody, myself included, is ever going to be able to say, oh, I'm never going to make a mistake again. In fact, I'd wager that over an Ironman, every athlete makes several mistakes over such a long day as that. It could be something that's relatively, innocuous, such as taking the wrong line through a corner, running things a little bit wide, coming close to crashing. Quite often, it comes with nutrition, but it could also be where you start, how you approach a turn buoy in the swim. We all make mistakes, but the more time that we spend out there, racing, training, making these mistakes, the better place we're going to be to race well. And again, this is just experience. This is nothing that I can really teach you. I can share with you some of the really obvious mistakes, but we're all individuals. We all need to get to know our own body. In our racing, find what works for us. And the consistency of turning up to training, racing, making these mistakes is what really matters. And the consistency, everybody in the triathlon space will tell you how consistency is key, but it's hard to push home just how important it is. And it does make life difficult. When I was in the film industry, it was very difficult. Like, training just wasn't an option. Most days that I was working, if you're out the house for 14, 15, 16 hours a day, there's no chance for training. And I know people who, if they are sort of in medical school and residency, perhaps it's just not possible. People who just work silly long hours, but they will have, people who work as nurses perhaps, they will have days where they're not doing any work and they can try to catch up. But honestly, if you were to offer me two athletes, one who works 4 days on, 4 days off, and one who has a 9 to 5, the one who works the 9 to 5 is going to be able to achieve a better level of performance because of that consistency. Now, the athlete who works 4 on, 4 off, they can fit in long sessions perhaps more frequently. They can do double sessions more. But it's just not having that same level of consistency. It does really hurt. But what really goes, beyond the frequency of the sessions as well, is somebody's approach to training throughout the year. So a trap I think a lot of people will fall into is that they will, they'll have a great season and they get sort of September, October, and they go, right, I need to take a break, which they do. But rather than taking a couple of weeks off, maybe 1 week of total rest and followed by, 1, 2, maybe 3 weeks of sort of gentle training, just moving the body, they go, I'm not going to follow any kind of program. I'm just going to do what I want until we get to the spring and I pick it back up again. And then they go to pick up their training again around sort of like this time of year, often that kind of like March, April time. And they realise that they're really unfit and they're not where they need to be. and they've lost so much of that fitness that they thought was always there in their back pocket if they needed it. And it's that kind of that off and on relationship that people can have with coaching or training plans or just sort of structured training, whatever that looks like, that really hurts people. And yes, you do need to step off sometimes. I mean, some people, they just love it. They can keep going year after year after year. But most people, they need some time to themselves to clear their heads, do a little bit of something. But that little bit of something, you can't afford to take more than kind of 4 to 6 weeks at the end of the season away from structured training, which 6 weeks really is a push if you want to continue really improving. And that, again, it's just the difference between that, that person who laps you when you're still on your first lap of the Ironman course and they go flying past you to lap you. And you go, these people, they're superhuman. They've just been committing to their training in a structured manner for years and years and years on end. And yes, there is some privilege, time, money, and that they may well have that you don't have. But it is so much of it. It's that consistency, it's that aerobic fitness, but also it's staying injury free. Now, injury, it is just the enemy of triathletes. It's the enemy of consistency. It's the enemy of performance. And we need to do everything that we can to avoid injury. And this looks like strength work, because if you go to the physio and you've got a dodgy knee or a dodgy hip, there's a good 7 out of 10 chance to go, yeah, your glutes aren't contributing the way they should be, and other muscles are having to contribute for that, and those muscles are getting tight, which are pulling on this, which has resulted in the pain that you're experiencing in your Achilles, in your knee, in your hip, in your plantar fasciitis, whatever the issue is, chances are it can be traced back to, again, 7 out of 10 times it can be some of your glute muscles, your hamstrings, general tightness. These are issues that can be resolved with strength training. And the physio will give you strength exercises to help overcome this injury. But if you'd taken the time to do the strength training in the first place, you wouldn't be spending hundreds of pounds on a physiotherapist if you just found 45 minutes a week to do strength training. So strength training is the number one way to avoid injury. The second way is to build volume up gradually. And this is, again, the importance of that structured training year round. If you can increase your long ride by just 5 or 10 minutes a week consistently, you are going to reduce your risk of injury dramatically, rather than having to increase your volume by sort of 20, 30 minutes a week, because you're complacent with your training and you realise, holy crap, I've got a 70.3 in 6 weeks and I'm nowhere near ready. And you also need to open your mind to new concepts, new ways of thinking, such as including strength training. But also such as, maybe I'll try this different approach to training. Maybe I'll try this different piece of kit. Now, a lot of the piece of kit, that, as I touched on at the top of the episode, a lot of these pieces of kit are a waste of money. They are just preying on people's desperation to get faster, to achieve their goals, to qualify for the age group team or the world championships. Just throw money at this compression wear and that will completely transform your race. Chances are it won't. There's not a lot of science supporting compression wear, but I'm never going to tell somebody not to wear it if it makes them feel good and they enjoy it. But as sports science changes, we do need to keep an open mind. Now, there are lots of people out there who will tell you, oh, you're doing that wrong. You've got to do it this way. This is the way to do it. Don't use disc brakes. You've got to use rim brakes. Oh, no, you don't want to touch tubeless tyres. They're the worst. You need a pair of tubs. That's what you need, tubular tyres. People who they've had their mind really closed for several years. But you know what? These people who are adamant about a certain way of doing things, they're not normally the fastest athletes. They're just people who've got a very clear idea on their head of what's right and what's wrong, and that they are right and everybody else is wrong. It's the triathlon equivalent of that boring old bloke in the pub who's chewing your ear off about something that you're just looking for any escape to crawl away from them. They're so convinced they're right. they're holding court, they're trying to get backup from people around them. It's the same idea. Okay, and you just need to know when to go, yeah, okay, that's great, thanks mate, appreciate it, and just go away and go, yeah, I'm going to ignore everything that guy said. Now, most triathletes, when they start out in their journey, and throughout their journey, they are sponges of new information. And when you have somebody who has so much confidence about them and really wants to tell you, yes, this is the way we do things, this is the right way, this is the wrong way, that can be really appealing. That can be so appealing for us as athletes to have somebody who guides us through these things. They go, oh, I've got the answers for you. This is where you've been struggling. This is what you've been doing wrong. But ultimately, it will lead to more frustration if they don't know what they're talking about. I'd like to think I'm more qualified and experienced than 99% of triathletes out there when it comes to guiding people through their triathlon journey. I mean, I wouldn't be a very good professional coach if I wasn't. But I still refrain from giving ultimatums, telling people what it is to do, because everyone's an individual and you need a different approach. Are disc brakes fine? Yes. Are rim brakes fine? Yes. Are steel frames fine? Yes. Are aluminium frames fine? Yes. Carbon fibre? Yes. There's so much that is fine and that will work. I want you to avoid listening to anyone who is going to give you really clear, right, wrong, this is the way to do things. You need to have an open mind. You need to be open to new ideas. You need to listen to new ideas, new people. I mean, a lot of it's nonsense. You'll hear people out there who will go, oh, you know what, this is absolutely the best way for you to change your diet, have a carnivore diet. That's the way to go. Yeah, complete load of nonsense. Oh, studies suggest that having an alternating effort throughout your bike will give you a better result than holding a consistent power. I mean, we're riding on hills. There's always going to be fluctuations in power. I'm not doing some ridiculous plus and minus 20 watts every 10 minutes to my pacing strategy because one study suggested that was the right way to do it. That's nonsense. There is a lot of stuff out there which is rubbish, but there's also a lot of stuff out there which is good. Okay, and the fact that you listen to this podcast now is really important because you are open to listening to someone who's sharing new ideas with you. You just need to make sure that you are, you're filtering out the rubbish and you find people who you respect, who haven't got sponsored deals with companies that are pushing their products, that you can go, okay, right, well, this person actually seems to have a good understanding and a good background in what it is that works well. And by following their advice, that's how I'm going to achieve my potential. Which brings me round to coaching. The athletes who are at the very top of their game, I would wager, I put really good money on the fact that they will be coached. Because not only is it having that plan built around you, it is the feedback, it is the support, it's the answering of the questions, it's the time they save on other areas of their life, it's the balance they achieve, it's the accountability, it's everything that comes with that. And that is part of being open to new ideas and concepts. A coach will challenge you about certain things, but you should also challenge the coach about certain things. It is a two-way relationship. It is incredibly difficult for you to achieve your potential in isolation. Chatting to the triathlon club coach once a week at the swim session, okay, is all well and good. Heading out for a ride on the weekend with mates, that's all fine. But having somebody who's really in your corner, supporting you every step of the way, that is what's going to get you results, okay? That is what it is that helps people really unlock their potential. All of the best professional athletes will be working with a coach. There are some elites out there who don't work with coaches, but those, and sometimes they get very good results, but they are they blow really hot and cold. Lionel Sanders, I'm sorry to mention him for the second time this episode. I know this is the Age Group Triathlon podcast, and I do like Lionel. But he doesn't. Well, he has worked with coaches in the past, and then he fires the coaches, and then he hires them, and then he fires them. But his performance, it blows so hot and cold. Ironman Texas, this weekend just gone. He said on Instagram, I thought I was ready to race an Ironman. I wasn't. But if he had been working with a coach, I mean, last time I saw he was using ChatGPT. It's no real surprise that he had the result that he did, given that. But if he'd had a coach that would be able to look at his training and gone, no, we need to focus on this because Texas is coming, or your run isn't where it needs to be, we need to reconsider whether it's worth starting. They could have had that support, but he didn't, and he had a disappointing result. But even as age groupers, a lot of the very best, if not all the very best, they will have coaches, because we, especially as age groupers, we don't have time to do all the research, to do all the plan writing, to do everything ourselves, which is required to achieve excellence in triathlon. So you say, oh, well, you are a coach, Simon, you would say that, but I mean, yes, but I wouldn't be doing this job if I didn't believe it worked, if I didn't believe it's the best for me. Now, obviously, coaching, it's not cheap, and there is a certain level of privilege associated with someone who's able to afford that. Obviously, household income has to be above a certain point before you can think about spending money on a coach. However, as far as investments go, if you have somebody who goes, oh, well, there's no way that I'm paying a coach, but I am going to drop ridiculous money on this shiny new Canyon bike that I spent $8,000 on, then you do need to go, no, you have just got your priorities wrong there. I can tell you which one's going to make you faster, which one's going to help you take hours in some cases, if not, several minutes off of your personal best. And I tell you one thing, it's not a marginally faster bike. Now, if you can't afford to work with a coach like me on a rolling monthly basis, that's fine, okay? I reckon that, the vast majority of triathletes, they're going to look at the rates and go, yeah, there's no way I can justify that. And that's fine, you're not a failure for being in that position. What I'd recommend in that case, you can look at one of my coach training plans, okay? Where I take an established training plan and I build it around you with monthly check-ins, monthly coach sessions and edits to the plan. Or we can have a look at stand-alone training plans that either myself or another coach has written, okay? These are going to be so much better than the AI rubbish that's being churned out. There's lots of studies about the high rates of injury around people who follow AI training plans. It's going to end up being cheaper for you in the long run, because yes, you'll have to spend £40-50 on the training plan, but you're much more likely to achieve your goals and much less likely to need to spend hundreds on physio. If you're interested in any of these, my email is down below. You can drop me an email there, or you can follow me on Instagram, which is also down there, and send me a DM if you prefer that. I really want to make sure that I can help support you with your goals and make sure that you actually, are practicing the habits that are going to make you the best athlete that you can be. So as you can tell, this is a really rich tapestry, and it involves a lot of time and a lot of money in many cases to achieve this level of performance. You really do need to dedicate your life to endurance sport if you want to achieve these kinds of things. And you may be thinking, you know what, Simon? I don't have the time. I don't have the money. I don't have the resources to achieve something like that. And that puts you in the 99%, okay? The vast majority of people who are happy just turning up, getting a bit better each year, taking on different distances, going around the world, having fun with triathlon. Now, we can all improve, but the people who will go past you like you're standing still, the people who are finishing the race when you're coming off the bike, okay? These are people who are on another level, who have made incredible sacrifices and invested so much in themselves and their racing for them to achieve what they've achieved. So if a lot of things that I've listed here make you think, there's no way I can do that, that's too much, I'm not willing to do that, it doesn't work for me with my lifestyle, then that's fine. That's where you are at the moment. Maybe in 10 years things will be different and you can dedicate a bit more to your performance. But when people go flying past you on the course, just tell yourself, look, they're different athletes in a different place in their life, with lots of different factors that are simply contributing towards that. And yes, you may have people who finish sort of 20 minutes ahead of you in your age group when you thought you were actually in really good shape, and go, how on earth am I going to close that gap? Well, there's an awful lot that I've covered in this episode that explains that, some of which you can achieve, some of which you can't. Okay, so I want you to go away from this understanding just how much goes into performance, what it takes to be able to improve, but with the understanding that, when you improve, that doesn't mean that you're necessarily going to jump straight to being superstar status. It's going to take years of grinding, years of hard work, and take the time to, rather than simply looking ahead up the field, take a look over your shoulder, take a look behind you and go, wow, look at how far I've come. Look at how the old version of me looks up to the current version of me. Look at how my friends and my family perceive everything that I do. And know, actually, you know what? I'm already doing a stand-up job. And of course I want to get faster. We all want to get faster. But sometimes you just have to be kind to yourself. You just have to be patient. Hope you found that interesting. I hope you found that useful. I know there are a few contradictions in there, but that is all to do with the balance of training. It's all about having a pragmatic approach and having to accept that, yes, aerobic fitness is key, but that's all for nothing if you neglect other areas and vice versa. It's all part of the big picture of preparing for a triathlon, which, is why it's so complicated and why we admire these athletes who are so much faster than ourselves. Thank you once again for your company. I will see you all next week, and I'm wishing you the very best of luck with your training in the meantime.